Edson, known as Dico, was a humble boy living in the city of Bauru, in Sao Paulo. He worked as a shoeshine boy to help his family, but in his spare time he devoted himself to his passion for soccer. One day, he and Zoka, his younger brother, were playing with a rag ball, but in the middle of the game they ended up falling into a pile of mud. When they returned home, their mother, Celeste, scolded them and told them they should focus on their studies instead of wasting time playing soccer. She couldn't stand the idea of her boys playing soccer because her husband, Dondino, had tried to pursue a career in the sport but now worked as a janitor in a hospital. Despite this, Pelé cannot forget soccer, and during the 1950 World Cup, he listens to the broadcast of the final from the roof of a bar. Dondino is inside listening to the game on the radio, with Brazil and Uruguay tied 1-1. Unfortunately, near the end of the game, the Uruguayans scored and Brazil lost the chance to win its first World Cup title. Later, Edson meets with his father, who is still saddened by the team's defeat, and promises that one day he will win a World Cup. His father is happy about this, but soon changes his mind and repeats his wife's advice for his son to stay away from soccer and devote himself to his studies. The next morning, Celeste takes Edson to help her with her housework and leaves him waiting in the kitchen. Shortly after, Jose, her employer's son, shows up with a group of friends, saying that there will be a youth cup in Bauru. They look at a piece of newspaper that says Santos Soccer Club is organizing this competition to recruit new players for its junior team. Edson gets excited and says he will also participate, because he wants to be as famous as Pelé, Vasco's goalkeeper. However, he ends up saying the wrong name and says Pelé, which makes Jose and his friends mock the boy. Edson tries to fight back, but his mother appears shortly after and tells her son to behave so she doesn't lose her job. Even so, when Jose leaves the kitchen, Edson takes the newspaper ad and goes to call his friends to participate in the tournament. Now that the team is formed, they will compete against other youth teams, with games taking place on 2 open fields. Throughout the matches, Edson shows natural talent and his team gains ground, but Jose's team, called the Kings, is the favorite in the competition. To make matters worse, Jose starts teasing Edson and his friends because they don't even have uniforms or cleats to play in. Being the butt of everyone's jokes, the friends think of a way to get money when they see a train unloading bags of peanuts. The 4 then take some of the bags and run back to their neighborhood. Later, Edson and his friends start selling peanuts and shining shoes, hoping to raise enough money to buy soccer cleats. However, Jose and his team show up nearby, and when they see Edson, they start teasing him again, calling him Pelé. Enraged, Edson slaps him and the young man start fighting in the middle of the street, with Dondino watching from afar. Later, Edson shows up with a bruise on his mouth, but when his mother asks what happened, he says it was just a fight at school. Furious, she says she will talk to the teacher about it, but Dondino, already knowing the whole truth, decides to resolve the matter himself. The next day, Dondino tells his son that he supports his decision to dedicate himself to soccer, but that he needs to control his anger and not get into fights. Edson promises to do so, and hours later, it's time for the Youth Cup final. Edson and his friends were only able to buy used soccer shoes, and Yuri made the uniforms using pieces of curtains. Finally, the teams are called onto the field, but when it is Edson's turn, Jose had told the narrator to call him Pelé, and that the name of his team was the Barefoot Ones. Despite his father's advice, the young man goes to confront Jose, but his friends hold him back so they won't be kicked off the field. After that, the narrator announces the participation of Waldemar de Brito, a famous player at the time who came as a scout for the Santos team. Finally, the teams enter the field, and when the game begins, the Kings take the lead and easily start to beat Os Descalcos. Within a few minutes of the start, the score is 6-0, and Jose teases Edson again, calling him Pelé once more. Overcome with anger, he runs towards Jose, but from the stands, Edson sees his father and remembers his words. So after calming down, the young man takes off his cleats and says he can play better without them. The second half begins, and when Edson receives the ball, he remembers how he used to play in his neighborhood, following the Brazilian style of Ginga. Thanks to this, the young man runs freely across the field, nutmegging his opponents, touching the ball with his shoulder and controlling it with his chest. All this talent impresses the crowd, and Edson finishes the play, scoring a goal for the Barefoot team. His friends do the same and take off their uniforms and old cleats to play with all their might. The team soon gets in sync and the Barefoot team narrows the score, scoring 5 goals in a row. Unfortunately, the second half ends and the Kings win the competition by 1 goal. Despite this, the victory is overshadowed by the crowd, who chant Pelé's name due to his incredible soccer talent. After the game, Waldemar de Brito goes to Dondino and hands him his card, offering his son a chance to play for Santos. However, before he can talk to his father, Edson sees the peanut carriers on the field looking for the thieves. He then runs away with his friends into the woods, but a heavy rain begins to fall and they end up getting separated. In the middle of their escape, Thiago trips and twists his ankle, with Edson pulling him to hide in a small tunnel. The two young men wait for the porters to leave, but the rain gets worse and a landslide occurs. Pelé manages to get out, but Thiago ends up trapped and unable to breathe. The young man calls for help and the porters go to help him out, but it is too late and Thiago does not survive. The young man's body is taken back to the neighborhood and Edson cries in front of his mother, feeling guilty for losing his friend. He then promises to give up soccer and devote himself to his studies, because if he hadn't stolen the peanuts to buy soccer shoes, none of this would have happened. As soon as the young man falls asleep, Celeste returns to the room and Dondino gives her the card he received from Waldemar de Brito. However, she thinks it best to put it aside and asks her husband to take Edson to help him at the hospital. Another day goes by and the boy goes to work with his father, but Dondino recognizes that his son deserves something more dignified than cleaning dirt at the hospital. Because of this, during work breaks, he teaches Edson how to master the ball using fruit. The idea is for the young man to let go of his strength and play with more skill. 5 years pass and Edson, now a teenager, has improved his ball control but his dream of playing professionally has been left behind. However, one day, Celeste sees her son's talent for soccer and decides to bet on a career for Edson. Later, when he and Dondino return home, they find Waldemar de Brito in the living room, who offers the young man a spot on the Santos Football Club team. Edson is happy about this, and days later, he says goodbye to his family and goes to the city of Santos in pursuit of his dream. Once there, the young man trains with dedication, but his style of swaying is not well received by the coach, who tells him to play with more technique. However, even after earning a spot on the Santos junior team, Edson is unable to play properly and can't even score a penalty kick. Believing it to be a sham, the young man packs his bags and heads to the train station to return to Bauru. However, Waldemar saw the young man leaving the club and followed him there to convince him to stay on the team. Edson does not understand why the coach does not let him play with his swaying style, and the player explains that with the defeat of the national team in the 1950 World Cup, many blamed Brazilian soccer's swaying style. However, he reveals that the Ginga is a historical heritage and was the basis for the martial art of capoeira. Over time, the Ginga was adapted to soccer, but ended up being frowned upon by fans, especially with Brazil's defeat in the previous World Cup. After telling this story, Waldemar offers Edson the choice of leaving or returning to the club and showing his true Ginga. After thinking for a while, the young man decides to try again, and after days of training, the team organizes a match between the official and junior teams of Santos. During the first half, things go badly for the junior team, which loses 3-0. Playing technically has not worked for Edson, so he gathers all his courage and returns to the game, following the teachings he learned from his father. As soon as he receives the pass, Edson dribbles past the opposing players with smooth movements and nutmegs anyone who crosses his path. Finally, with the ball in the air, he jumps and performs a bicycle kick, hitting the goal in the corner. All the players applaud his performance, except the coach, who calls him over for a talk. Edson apologizes for disobeying his orders, but instead of scolding him, the coach tells him to continue using this technique in the next games. Over the months, Edson moves from the junior team to the professional team, showing off his skills and scoring goals in every new game. His incredible dribbling, ball control, and scoring ability make him famous not only in Santos, but throughout the country. That's why, at 16, Edson is already being considered for the next Brazilian national team. He then returns to Bauru, reunites with his family, and gives his mother a new stove and a radio as gifts so they can listen to his games at home. The next day, Dondino calls Edson and Zoka to listen to the broadcast on Radio Bandeirantes, where the list of players for the national team will be revealed. Names such as Zagallo, Garrincha, and Vava are called, but just as he is about to lose hope, Edson hears his name. The young player can barely contain his excitement, but he also knows that he now carries the hopes of an entire nation in the sport. Before Edson returns to the club, Dondino gives his son the old shirt of the Barefoot team, with the name Pelé sewn on the back. The young man still dislikes the nickname, as it was the way people used to mock him. However, his father tells him that this was actually the name he was given after everyone saw him play with his unique style for the first time. Edson accepts the gift and takes the bus back to Santos to continue training. In 1957, a year before the World Cup, he goes to a party, and in addition to meeting his teammates Garrincha, Zito, and Didi, he also discovers that his old rival Jose is also on the team, now under the name Mazzola. During a press conference, Mazzola tells journalists that the Brazilian team will play with more technique to ensure victory in the 1958 World Cup. He also says that Jenga is a primitive and outdated way of playing and that it will have no place on the team. Edson is irritated by this and tries to defend the Jenga that his father taught him, but is interrupted by the national team coach, Vicente Fiala. The next morning, the coach reprimands Edson for his behavior at the party and tells him to play according to the training or he will be out of the team. With no other choice, the young man obeys, and Vicente takes all the players to play a training match. Journalists and photographers record the moment, and once again, Edson does not perform well using the technique taught by the coach. Then, when he receives the pass, the young man puts his fear aside and starts playing his own way, dribbling past the opposing team. However, he ends up being blocked by one of the defenders and falls awkwardly, causing a knee fracture. Because of this, his participation in the 1958 World Cup is uncertain, and the media questions whether Brazil will make the same mistakes as in the past. Sometime later, it is time for the World Cup to begin, and the Brazilian team travels to Sweden, with Edson still recovering from his injury. With the help of doctors, the young man undergoes a difficult treatment process while watching his teammates play on television. Fortunately, Brazil wins the first match against Austria 3-0, but the second match against England ends in a 0-0 draw. The media already considers Brazil to be at the bottom of the group, and the team will face the Soviet Union in a decisive match. To make matters worse, the match against England left 3 players injured, including Mazzola, who had been selected as the team's striker. Meanwhile, in Bauru, Dondino is at the bar watching the news about the Brazilian team. The journalist then announces that Mané Garrincha has been selected to replace Didi, and Edson Nascimento will be the striker, replacing Mazzola. This news makes Dondino very proud, but on the day of the big game, Edson can barely control himself and feels sick in the bathroom. Even so, Coach Vicente doesn't care and tells the young man to get his head straight, because Brazil needs this victory anyway. In addition, the doctor asks Edson to take care of his knee, as any further injury will prevent him from playing forever. Finally, the young man enters the field, but is greeted with boos, as no one believes that an injured 17-year-old can bring victory. After the national anthems of both nations, the match begins and Edson is soon overcome with nervousness. To make matters worse, the Soviet Union team is very aggressive and the young man can barely stay on his feet amid the attacks of the opposing forwards. The Brazilian fans are tense, but their doubts turn to hope when Garrincha finds a gap in the defense and passes the ball to Vava. The skilled striker scores a goal, and in the second half, seals Brazil's victory with a 2-0 win. Despite this victory for the team, Edson's performance is not the best, which only attracts negative attention from the media and fans. Still, Brazil continues to advance and reaches the semifinals, where it will face the French team. Mazzola is still injured and Edson remains in the starting lineup, but as before, he misses passes and is unable to handle the opposing defense. With the score tied at 2-2, the team returns to the locker room and Edson goes to talk to Mazzola, asking him to return to the game, as he is only hindering the team. However, the striker admits that Pelé has always been more talented thanks to his swaying hips, which have always enchanted the fans who watched him. Now is the time for him to bring back his swaying hips and secure Brazil's victory with all his talent. Feeling motivated, Edson returns to the field, and during a throw-in by France, the player moves forward and controls the ball with his chest. Then, the player looks at his teammates, all marked by the French defense, and decides to make an attack on his own. With skill, Edson dodges the defense and makes a backheel pass to Garrincha, who runs into the opponent's area. As soon as he crosses the ball, Edson takes it on the first touch, nutmegs 2 French players, and finishes with a volley, scoring his first goal in the World Cup. Not satisfied, Brazil advances again and Edson lifts the ball and shoots, scoring another goal for the team. The match is almost over when Edson starts another attack, feinting the defender and passing to Vava. The player returns the ball and the 17-year-old shoots into the corner of the goal, closing the match with a score of 5-2. Finally, Edson has discovered his style of play and celebrates the victory by jumping and punching the air, which would become his trademark. Now, there is only one game left to decide the World Cup champion, with Brazil facing the home team, Sweden. During a press conference, the two teams meet to answer questions and give their predictions for the match. However, the Swedish coach begins to take advantage, calling the Brazilian team disorderly and taking victory for granted. Vicente is offended by these words, but to avoid a confrontation, he simply leaves the room. The media quickly spreads the news that Brazil is an inferior team and their chances of winning the cup against the home team are practically nil. This news shakes the team's morale, but during breakfast, Edson calls the team together for a warm-up. None of the players are in the mood for it, but Mazzola joins in the fun and challenges everyone to see who can keep possession of the ball. So, inside the hotel where they are staying, the Brazilian team plays around with keep-uppies and ball passes. At one point, Edson ends up knocking over the sugar from one of the tables and apologizes to the guest sitting there, who has a very familiar face. After this game, the team gathers in the locker room, when Coach Vicente shows up and everyone believes he is going to scold them for what they did at the hotel. But instead, the coach says he was impressed with how the players had demonstrated their talents so far. Even though he had focused on more technical training, he realized that Ginga is the Brazilian way of playing soccer and the team should bet on that. He then asks the players to give their best in the match and do one last training session before the game. The next morning, the day of the cup final arrives, and this time the team will play in their blue uniforms. Before getting dressed, Edson decides to wear the old shirt his friends made under his uniform, finally accepting his nickname Pelé. The whole of Brazil is waiting for this game, including Celeste, who always got nervous during her son's games and therefore never watched them. However, she decides to turn on the radio that Edson gave her as a gift and waits for the start of the grand final between Brazil and Sweden. With both teams on the field, the referee blows the whistle to start the game, with Brazil taking possession of the ball. The opposing team marks Pelé heavily, and after a bad pass by Garrincha, Sweden takes the ball and starts a dangerous play in the Brazilian area. The Swedish fullback crosses to the striker, but he misses the header and the ball goes out, resulting in a goal kick for Brazil. Goalkeeper Gilmar takes the kick and Pelé controls the ball, but at the same moment, he suffers a heavy foul from the Swedish defender. The referee allows play to continue and Sweden goes on the attack, scoring the first goal of the match less than 4 minutes into the game. Fear takes hold of all Brazilians, who do not want another defeat like the one in 1950. However, as soon as the match restarts, Pelé goes all out and passes the ball to Garrincha, who runs at full speed into the Swedish area. He then passes the ball to Pelé, but instead of trying to score, he fakes a shot and lets the ball go to Vava, who reduces the score to 1-1. As soon as the match resumes, Sweden tries another attack, but Gilmar makes the save and passes the ball quickly. Pelé regained possession and passed to Vava, who passed to Garrincha, who dribbled past the Swedish defender and crossed the ball into the opponent's area, with Vava finishing the play with another goal. The Swedish team is left speechless in the face of Brazilian talent, while the world watches football history being written in this World Cup final. To cap it all off, Pelé receives the ball, flicks it over the opposing defender with a sombrero and scores another goal for Brazil with a first-time shot. However, the game was not over yet, and Pelé made an assist, passing the ball to Zagallo to score the Brazilian team's fourth goal. Far away, Dondino watched the game with his friends at the bar and was moved to see his son fulfilling his greatest dream. Sweden manages to reduce the score, but Pelé ends the game with a header, crowning Brazil as World Cup champions. In the midst of this historic sporting event, Edson Arantes do Nascimento himself said years later that Pelé was born in that 1958 World Cup. After the victory, the young player fainted on the field, and when he woke up, he couldn't believe what had happened. From that day on, not only did Brazil's Ginga style become iconic, but Pelé was hailed as one of the greatest athletes of all time. In addition to being considered a national treasure, he was the sport's top scorer and the only player to win 3 World Cups. The only record he never managed to achieve was scoring 5 goals in a single match, a record he left to Dondino, his beloved father. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.